Anger sometimes gets a bad rap. I think anger for us is important because it's telling us something. If I am low in empathy, for whatever reason, but I'm low, does that mean that I really cannot learn to open my eyes and my heart more to what's going on around me and to be present emotionally in a way that people could truly feel?
Hello and welcome to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I'm Will Polston. This is episode number 157, and in this episode I'm joined by Patrick Kilcarr. Patrick Kilcarr, PhD, has been director of Georgetown University's Centre for Personal Development since 1999. The centre offers, along with direct clinical services, workshops and training on a variety of mental health issues, especially related to emotional intelligence, leadership and motivation. Patrick is a master trainer in emotional intelligence, certifying professionals to use the EQI 2.0, the most valid and reliable self-assessment of emotional intelligence, to assess and evaluate the social and emotional competencies of individuals in a variety of professional venues. He graduated from the Georgetown University Leadership Certification course, along with being an adjunct professor in the School of Health Science, Georgetown University, teaching interactive courses on personal development, sexual health, and emotional intelligence. He completed his PhD in Human Development through the acclaimed Institute of Child Study at the University of Maryland, College Park. All of his work is directed towards strengthening the individual with respect to his or her innate talents and abilities. He has written extensively on emotional intelligence, addiction, and attention deficit hyperactivity. With regards to ADHD, he co-authored an award-winning book, Voices from Fatherhood, Fathers, Sons, and ADHD. Dr. Kilcarr maintains a private practice in Washington, D.C., where he offers individuals, couples, and group family therapy to local residents. In this episode, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and ADHD. So, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Will. It's great to be here.
You've got quite the background. And as we've just heard in the introduction, what you've been doing is fascinating for years. And I think now more than ever, emotional intelligence has become such a big topic, particularly in the world of entrepreneurship, particularly in leadership, because people are becoming very much aware of how they interact with others and also having their own self-awareness and the awareness of others, which of course emotional intelligence comes into. But before we really go into what exactly emotional intelligence is and how that can be used in the various different applications, what made you get into the work that you're doing in the first place?
Well, this goes way back. And in the mid 80s, my first job, I was working in a juvenile and domestic relations district court as a counselor. And I remember sitting in my office. And in my office, there was a family, and there was the teenager who was struggling and having all kinds of difficulties. And Will, I remember sitting here watching them and listening to them. And what I became acutely aware of is at that moment, I knew there was so much happening within this family, and I had no idea how to help them. Literally none, other than what would be common sense. And then I began to read about family therapy and family counseling. And so I went and I got my master's in marriage and family therapy. And then after that, I felt there was still more I needed to know or wanted to know. And so I went and got the PhD in psychology. And then you fast forward, the question you're asking, I think for me is what's really great, is if we're in the mental health field or we're an executive coach or whatever it may be, we're always kind of looking for that holy grail, that thing that really is going to make a difference in the lives of the clients or the patients, however it's framed, that we serve. And I went to this conference right toward the end of the 1990s. And this woman got up and started talking about emotional intelligence. And this is maybe 4 or 5 years after Dan Goleman's book came out, which is the classic called Emotional Intelligence. And most people have either read it or heard of it. But she started talking about emotional intelligence in this way that really made complete sense to me. And it's the way it's represented in my book in terms of these 15 competencies. And she said, the 15 competencies that I'm going to be talking about, every one of us in this room, every person on this planet operates out of these every day. Now, some are stronger than others. Some really could require some massaging and some work. But these 15 are always there, kind of starting with self-regard. How do we feel about who we are? Our self-concept, how people see us, self-esteem, how we see ourselves, down through assertiveness, social responsibility, and ending with optimism. And then she began to talk about this tool, the EQI, and that within the EQI are these 15 competencies. And I sat there and, Will, I was transfixed. I'm going, my God, this is such a great way to really think about our own personal growth. And it made absolute and complete sense to me. It was beyond the psychological theories that are out there. It was beyond things that felt at times like it really didn't work for certain people. I listened to this woman talk about the EQI and emotional intelligence, and it just rang so true. So after the session, I asked to talk to her. We sat down. One thing led to another, and over time, I was invited by MHS, they own this tool, to come and become a master trainer in the EQI, to certify people to use it in their own practice or in their schools or in their corporations. And so for years, that's what I've kind of been doing. I've been training other people to use this tool. But really the book, and I don't know how many people in the audience know about the book. However, what I did with the EQI, which is really a tool that was made for the boardroom or the classroom, kind of higher education or corporate America, I began using it in my clinical sessions. And the book represents the true breakthroughs that have happened in using this tool over the course of treatment. Because the EQI, if everybody in the audience, if we all came together and I were to give everybody a training to certify them to use the EQI with regard to emotional intelligence, everybody would take the EQI and you'd get one 45-minute telephonic feedback session with me or someone like me. 45 minutes. And the way I talk about that in the book is it's kind of like having a Ferrari and never taking it out of first gear. So being able to have this tool and the competencies and to be able to talk about it over the course of however long I'm fortunate to see this person has just felt to me to become a game changer. So I don't know how many people really use this clinically. I don't think many people do. For me, though, it's been wonderful, number one. And number two, I think it's offered people opportunities to understand themselves and to grow toward their own specific goals and to achieve a level of balance that may have taken much longer to get to, is what I think.
So you started off, you worked in family therapy, you realized that there was an opportunity to enhance the work that you were doing via a tool that you come across, which was the EQI tool, which we're going to go into in more detail. It's interesting you mentioned sort of family therapy specifically. So as many of the people listening to this will know, I originally trained in something called neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
And of course, Virginia Satir was one of the very famous family therapists that NLP was built upon, that and Milton Erickson's kind of hypnosis model and whatnot. So I think it's very, very interesting. And look, whether it's family therapy or relationships in general, why do most relationships or families break down? It comes down to communication, and more often than not, that's people not understanding necessarily the other party, or not necessarily having empathy, or whatever that may be. So that's super interesting. So for people that are listening to this that are completely new, they've maybe not read Emotional Intelligence, the Daniel Goleman book. Many people have all heard of IQ.
Yes.
So what's the difference between IQ and EQ, and why is EQ so important?
Great question. The IQ is what we are by and large natively born with, and it's our capacity to acquire, assimilate information, right? Goes through our working short-term memory into our long-term memory. And everybody is different. Some people have extraordinarily large IQs, some don't. And IQ, if I had an IQ of 100, it would be unlikely that I would really become a true rocket scientist, because the fact is that my brain just probably doesn't work that way. And so all of us with our born intellects, our born abilities, our born IQs, we find out what's really right for us and we move toward it to do the best we can with our abilities in the world. The difference between IQ, which is largely stationary, I mean, it can bend out a little bit here and there, but by and large, our IQ is kind of our IQ. The EQ, the emotional quotient, is really based on our learned experiences. It's based on the arc of our development, if you will, growing up. It's based on, the cultural interactions that we have, community, environmental interactions. It's all born out of that. And, it's interesting that in the book, there are some stories that when I was hearing these stories from my clients, I mean, I just wanted to cry because I could not imagine, specifically a parent, just treating a child the way that these individuals were treated. And to the credit of these individuals, that it did not break their emotional intelligence. Somehow they were able to hold it together, and then in their own journey to find a true sense of balance, to really appreciate and embrace who they are in the world, not what they heard they were, allowed them to really begin to find that sense of balance and the kind of life that they wanted to live. But the difference with the EQ and the IQ, if these 15 competencies, Will, are learned, which they are, then if, let's say, a moment ago you talked about empathy. Empathy is one of the 15 criteria, 15 competencies. If I am low in empathy, for whatever reason, but I'm low, does that mean that I really cannot learn to open my eyes and my heart more to what's going on around me and to be present emotionally in a way that people could truly feel? Because if I'm really low in kind of that part of emotion, if I'm low in empathy, people feel it. They do. But no, we can learn to open our hearts. We can learn to open our eyes. And does it take work? Sure. It's the kind of work, though, that I think we really want to feel more whole as a person. And when someone comes to me and I offer them at some point in our relationship to take the EQI, there's a page 3 on this fairly lengthy document, feedback document that they get. But page 3, it's color coded. It has, the 15 competencies and the scores, right? Some are lower, some are higher. And when people look at it, what we do, because all of us have been in some form of school, we go to the lowest possible score that's there, and we look at it, and then we begin to judge ourselves. But what I do is I invite them to step back and begin to look at what that's saying through my eyes, because what it begins to tell is a narrative. And the narrative is about where people really are at that moment in time. And I'll give you an example that a young woman came to see me, and she sat down, she said, look, I don't really understand what's going on in my life. I've got great friends, I've got a great job. I couldn't ask for more, and I feel often terrible. So we began talking about it. About the 4th session, that's usually when I offer somebody to take it, because that means if they come to 4 sessions, they'll keep coming back in all probability. I offered her to take it, she took it. And most people, when they look at that page 3, they just see numbers and colors. But she looked at it and her eyes filled up and she began to cry because she saw exactly what I was seeing. And what it said was this: Her emotional self-awareness, which is a competency, was extremely high, right? She was incredibly aware of what she was experiencing and feeling. Below that, her emotional self-expression was exceedingly low. So she felt a great deal and didn't talk about it very often. You go farther down, her stress tolerance was extremely high. So she could carry a lot, more so than most people. And then her flexibility was extremely high. So meaning she would go along with whatever was happening and not really talk about her specific needs. So what she saw, and I asked her, I said, what is it you're seeing right now? She goes, I'm a human doormat. And I went, yeah, that's kind of what it's looking like. And I said, explain it to me. All her friends, family, everybody would call her. Everybody would ask her to do everything. But no one ever was really there for her. She couldn't talk. She had no friends that she really could talk about. It was, how you doing? I'm fine. And that's what everybody always expected. They didn't expect her to be in a place of feeling, the pressure of life and feeling pushed down at times and feeling the need to really unload. There was no one in her life that really provided that opportunity. And she was sitting there and she said to me, I just don't know what to do. Well, there was a big trip coming up, and she was always the one, even though she's a medical doctor, doesn't have a lot of time for anything. She was always the one that scheduled the trip, put it together for everybody, made sure everything was taken care of. And I said, well, why don't you ask all your friends to do it? Because right now, because of work, you're just, you're underwater. And she started like shaking. She goes, I can't do that. I said, well, this is the perfect opportunity to begin to see, can you actually step into your friendships, people that love you, and maybe show a little vulnerability? So in the office, she did. She sent this email out to everybody. She felt terrible. She went home. Next morning, she sent me an email. She said, I want you to see what the people sent me. And I went, oh, man. And I opened it up. And it was a series of emails like, you go, girl. It's about time that we kind of pick up the mantle and do these things. They were all from these friends saying, you don't worry about it. We got it covered. But the fear is what? The fear is that, oh, if I step out of the role that I'm typically in, or people see Patrick more vulnerable or whatever the case is, they're not going to want to be around me anymore. Now, even though it feels ridiculous to think about it, that's the thought. That's the IQ. The EQ is saying, yeah, you're going to jeopardize this relationship if you begin to show any true vulnerability or weakness. And so that's just one little sliver of these larger pictures. And we all have an emotional intelligence. We all have ways of understanding, the whole array of feelings in our life, from the feelings that are great to the feelings that aren't. And we also are in a place where we experience other people's feelings. And if we come to a place where we really want it to begin to be different, it's my belief that we can. And to achieve that sense of what we hear a lot about today with emotional well-being and feeling emotional balance, I really believe it's achievable. And for some of it's a bit of a longer road to get there than others, but we can get there.
Thank you. So obviously you mentioned the tool, which is the EQI 2.0, and it's regarded as sort of the most valid and reliable self-assessment of somebody's emotional intelligence. So you've obviously seen so many of these results that people have, but for the people that are listening, I mean, even aside from them actually going and doing the tool, which they may choose to do, I believe it takes about 20 minutes to complete. What would you say are the three most common things that people don't do that they could do to start to build on their emotional intelligence?
That's a really great question, because there are two pieces that for me kind of bubble out, and people are somewhat surprised when I say it versus the other 15 or the other competencies. But one is the assertiveness. What does it really mean to be an assertive person? Now, some of us are assertive in certain places and not in other places. Road rage is a perfect example of people really being assertive. And it's more than assertive, obviously, it moves into aggression. But then as you talk to these people in the other parts of their life, they're not really assertive individuals. But it's something about that environment that just triggers them into this space and place. So what does assertiveness really mean? And then the other is independence. What does it really mean to be an emotionally independent individual? And what I mean by that is if my emotional independence is low, then what that means is it's kind of the old idiom that if you really want to know what I'm thinking, just ask the people around me. That I'm going to be thinking and doing what the people around me are doing if I'm low in emotional emotional independence. If I'm too high in emotional independence, now we all kind of understand what a lower score might mean, right? But there are times where a score can be too high. It's an overused strength. So that in independence, if I'm low, I don't really find my voice. I don't step up. I don't challenge what's going on around me. But if it's too high, I don't care what other people think. You can say what you want to say. I've got my ideas and my opinions in their mind, and nobody is going to change it. That's the high end of being too emotionally independent. And it's the same way with assertiveness. If I'm low in assertiveness, it's like this woman, you feel like a bit of a doormat. If you're too high, you're kind of like a bull in a china shop. And that's aggression. That's where it just kind of, so all of these move into different places, like the woman that I mentioned before, whose flexibility score was really high. Well, the issue was there that she never really did talk about at any point in time what it was that she wanted to do. She just did what her friends wanted to do without regard to what she wanted. And so assertiveness, independence to your question. And then the other is what I talked about earlier, emotional self-awareness. How aware am I in what I'm feeling? There's so many times, look, in the world of NLP and the different clients that you've worked with and people that you've worked with, where you ask people, what do you think or what do you feel? When you ask people what they think, they can come up with something. When you ask someone what they feel, often what you'll hear is, I don't know. And the piece is that we want to begin to understand what it is that we feel. Now, sometimes if we grew up in an environment that really did not allow for feeling, didn't allow for self-expression, and to a degree, hopefully less so in the world today, but often boys growing up, there's a bandwidth on the amount that they really can show how they feel, because societally it starts to become compressed. You can't really cry. You can't really, talk about how difficult it is. And allowing, but on the side for women, little girls growing up to women, that is something that's more allowed. And so part of it is being able to truly get a sense of what is it that I am feeling. And I spend a lot of time with people on that because they genuinely aren't sure. And that as they get more and more in touch with it, on one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, though, if I get really in touch with my anger, and I had a young guy who, when we first met, he just never got angry. And I said, how do you do that? I mean, write a book. How do you not truly get angry? And then as we worked together and he began to get in touch with that anger, it scared him. I mean, he was going, I don't know if I want to be feeling this stuff. And then as time went by and he was able to realize he could regulate what he's feeling and that the anger was a message, and it's an important message. Anger sometimes gets a bad rap. I think anger for us is important because it's telling us something. Either there's something that needed to happen that didn't, an expectation that didn't happen, something. And so being able to understand that the large array of feelings that we have are important. So those are kind of the three that Other people who are in the field probably wouldn't go with those three. They may say self-regard is the most important in optimism. There's a whole field. Positive psychology is all about optimism. And yes, I think that's hugely important. However, to really begin to understand who we are at this moment, moving outward toward who we really want to be and can be, I have a different starting point.
Okay, fair enough. And I know that one of the I understand kind of the mission that you're on now is all the work that you do is really directed towards um strengthening an individual to be able to sort of really focus on their talents and abilities and build on those and have an understanding of EQ to build on that. And obviously one of the areas that a lot of people will use their emotional intelligence is to enable them to be a better leader, whether that's be a better leader to the family as a parent, whether that's a better leader as a boss, whether that's a better leader as a sports team coach or captain or whoever it might be. So, how do these 15 competencies map across to leadership? And what's your opinion on how people can use their own emotional intelligence or awareness of their emotional intelligence to empower themselves as a leader and become a better leader?
Again, I so enjoy the question. I think it maps perfectly. If you have someone who is very aware of who they are in the world emotionally, and they're not only aware of where they are, but they also have a sense of where other people are that are in front of them. That generally what that means is not only are they aware of self, they have the capacity to listen, and they have the capacity to create a space where that person's thoughts can be known, as well as the thoughts of those around him or her. And I'll give you an example. There was a CEO of a big company here in Washington that I was working with, and I've worked with a number of CEOs, but this guy was palpably different in a way that I really had not seen with others. And I had the opportunity to see him run a staff meeting, and it was remarkable, where everybody was heard. If someone was talking and someone got excited about the topic or whatever and began talking over that person, you would see him gently put his finger out, look at the person, and that person would back it down. So this is a culture that these individuals exist within, so they know each other. And then that person could finish and he'd have the hand up and then he'd invite the other. It was just amazing. And there was this one moment where someone that was, one of the people at this staff meeting said to the CEO, I know you're not going to agree with me on this. However, do you mind if I share it? And he said to the woman, look, I want you to share anything you want. I don't have to agree with you. And if I don't think it's a good idea, but you all do, then you win. I don't. And I'm just listening to this and watching, and it's amazing. Then after that meeting, we go into his office and we're sitting in his office. And three separate occasions, people came in. And I was sitting there, and he did kind of a similar gesture that he did in the staff meeting, but he said, I'm going to get right back to you. And then they shut the door and didn't miss a beat in us talking. And as I'm getting up to leave, he's walking out with me and he says to his admin person, please call Carly and let her know that I'm going to stop by. And that was the first person that came in. So this guy not only said, hey, give me time, and everybody respected it, but then he followed up. It was this leadership that felt seamless to me. And subsequent to this, I've been able to talk with him and share with him what I do see in the way that he leads and what he does. And it's one of these pieces where, what is the goal? And if the goal is to be the best CEO possible, then I don't know if he would succeed or not, because the goal is to create the best product collectively that they can. And it's collectively, it's not one person, it's not one division, it's collective. And I just looked at that and thought, wow, this is really impressive. And I know that one person's leader may not be another person's leader. However, in watching this guy, again, just really fluidly being able to step into situations and invite people in and invite people to wait, and everybody just moved around one another with deep respect.
Mm.
But this guy also did the EQI, and he was extraordinarily emotionally intelligent. Where there were two areas that he was lower on. Now, he was strong in those two areas, but lower than the other 13 that we talked about and he looked at. This is a really emotionally intelligent.
What about, so the thing, the quote that came to mind, I think it's an old African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Which for me, that idea of what you're just talking about there, of creating that psychological safety, having the awareness, getting everybody involved makes sense. But then the kind of counter that I hear in more recent times is you take someone like a Steve Jobs, who's built one of the biggest brands on the planet, and he alienated people. Apparently, you read his biography, he had this reality distortion field where he pushed people. You've got someone on the other end of the spectrum like Elon Musk, who I believe is whether it's self-identified or has been clinically diagnosed, I don't know, as sort of on the autistic spectrum,
Yes,
who maybe lacks empathy. He works 80 hours a week. He demands that from others, but then arguably doing more for humanity than any other person.
yes.
What's your opinions when you look at those types of leaders and what they're achieving for humanity and their output, because that's what it is, versus somebody that's saying, right, well, yeah, that's great, we've got, everybody feels really comfortable, but then they've not done much, or maybe not done as much in what they're doing.
Well, I've thought a lot about exactly what you're saying. And I don't think you could have come up with two better examples, to be honest with you. And it's what I think about is this. You look at this CEO who kind of for me is your quintessential corporate leader, if there is to be one. And then you look at Musk or you look at Jobs. And these are individuals that live with a burning passion that is brighter than anyone around them. And I think because of their intellect, I think because of their creative genius, I think because that they will stop at nothing because they believe in it so, that's a force that will kind of plow through anything. And it's that type of thing where, yeah, I don't like, let's say that there are people at SpaceX that don't like Musk's leadership style. Yeah, maybe that's true to a point. However, what they can't deny is his dedication, is the fact that he stands often by exactly what he says, and he pushes people as hard as he pushes himself, which
Mm,
that's a whole debatable thing as well. I just think there are people that are leaders out there. George Patton is a good example. In World War II, what he did, he bothered a lot of people on a lot of different levels. The guy always said what was on his mind, not really filtered very much. But he did it in such a way that the passion that pushed this guy was felt by everybody in his presence constantly. And that may be part of it. If I'm in the presence of somebody that so believes in what they're doing and it just oozes out of them, whether I like them as a person or not, or whether I, evaluate their leadership style, the probability is I'm going to go after what is there if I'm part of this process or part of this organization, because it's just something that pushes you to do that. That's
mm.
within us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Another thing that I'm really curious to get your opinion on when it comes to emotional intelligence. So I might turn around and say, right, well, I think I'm emotionally intelligent. I've got a certain awareness of myself, and which therefore I then start thinking, well, I've got an awareness of other people. At what point does it stop becoming a projection? So me projecting on other people
Mm.
and it genuinely be where they're at emotionally versus my own projection on them. So for the people that aren't maybe familiar with this, there's a universal law known as the law of reflection and transparency, which is what you see in others is what you see in yourself. So I'm
Yeah.
really curious on your opinion on that.
Well, it goes back to exactly that piece that you talked about earlier, is the empathy. What do we feel? I'm if I'm sitting with you and you begin talking about something with a great deal of passion, and I kind of mirror that passion to you, that this is what I'm hearing. Is this what's going on? Is this where you want to take it? But there's a piece where if I begin to really feel what you're feeling, I mean that it's either transmitted or it's in me, then the mirroring piece begins to kind of stop. And what begins to take over is this dual creativity, because I'm feeling what you're feeling, or vice versa. And that projection piece kind of begins to fade and a true creativeness begins to unfold. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm curious to know the level of depth into the science because then we start looking at right. Well, is it something that we're co-creating? Is it what I think about what I'm thinking about, or is it my mirror neurons that are actually transmit? Like, I mean, we could go right down the rabbit hole with this, but I'm really
No,
curious.
you're exactly right, and it goes back to kind of looking at NLP. I mean, the whole neuro linguistic programming, and how you can change where people are emotionally on a dime, in terms of them beginning to look and see and experience something that was very big and all encompassing as the size of a peanut and a mile away from them. Now it's not gone. It didn't go away. It's there, but it's not impacting them the way that it did. And it's, I mean, I would love to sit and talk about NLP someday for a long time, because I think it's fascinating. I think it's something that not a lot of people really know about, but those that do, that it can make a difference in relationships across the board. Just because of the way of hearing where people are, what people are doing, and connecting with that. But then to go back to your original point, yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole with, is it then projection, and how do you really know you're connecting, and what is this creative gestalt really about? I agree with you, and that would be a great show to have. Actually, it really would.
You touched on at the beginning of the episode. You mentioned it a few times about a book, and I know there's a book that you've written, Voices from Fatherhood, um, and I believe it's Voices of Fatherhood,
Fathers,
Fathers,
sons, and
Sons,
ADHD.
and ADHD.
Right.
So, what's the premise of the book, and how does ADHD fit into it? Because obviously, ADHD in today's world is becoming, certainly over here in the UK, and I'm sure it's over in the States, becoming more and more and more sort of a widely considered trait or illness or whatever you want to label it as that people
Yes.
have. So, what's the premise of the book, and how's it helpful?
Well, when I was just before thinking about what I was going to do a dissertation in grad school, I went to a number of meetings. They're called CHAD, and these are children and adults with attention deficit disorder. So I would go to these meetings, and what I noticed at these meetings, Will, they were packed. There were a lot of people, very few guys. I never saw any dads. I mean, like never. And I began to wonder, well, what is that really about? And then I was looking at the research, and I began to wonder, well, the kids in school, particularly the boys, that have the ADHD, the big H, hyperactivity, these are the guys that are getting in trouble, and they're creating, the most smoke coming out of the window, and the parents are having to come into school every other week. And I began to wonder, well, the dads aren't here. So I use that more as a metaphor for where are the dads in the lives of these boys? What is that like? So for 2.5 years, I went around and I interviewed dads that kids had the big H. And I think it was a total of 72 interviews. And they were absolute, I mean, I felt more gratitude. In my daughter and son have ADHD, and I felt more gratitude at the end of that whole experience than I ever could tell you, in terms of there are dads who were really remarkable fathers to these boys and created space for these kids to make mistakes, to learn, to pull themselves up, and to go on to become the best that they could be in the world, whatever that was. And then there were other dads that were punishing and emotionally abusive, and just created this hole for these kids to constantly have to dig out of. And that in writing that book, which in some ways, as I'm thinking about it right now, there's a similar writing in terms of stories. The voices from fathers. There's a lot of really great stories about the boys and dads, and but it allowed me to really truly be given a map of what it means to be a loving, good dad to these, particularly these boys that really struggle. So.
And what was your biggest insight from having done those 72 interviews? What was the most common behavior of not that helped manage their ADHD? So what was the most common behavior that helped them manage their ADHD so that they were able to be inspired, productive, and have great outcome, rather than be the distraction, the
Yes.
naughty kid, etc., etc.?
Yes. I I think the biggest one is impulsivity. Now, not all kids with ADHD have impulsivity that's really notable, but most do, and especially with the big H. And what that means, it's the Dennis the Menace kind of syndrome. But by the time they really thought about what they were doing or saying, it already happened. And so, the horse is out of the barn. It's being able to kind of learn to read that child and see when they were going to kind of go out ahead of their skis and invite them back. Or when they did get out ahead of their skis, invite them back and not tell them what to do. Invite them to look at what would they do different.
Mm.
And that, because then what is it? These are kids that they're realizing not that they made a mistake. They realize that, oh, I want to do things differently. And what a different psychological way of looking at yourself as you power through life. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, you said about the impulsivity. I love, there's a video online which anyone can Google and go and find it. It's a video about Ferrari brain. I believe it's Dr. Edward Hallowell, and
Yes.
it's a couple of minute clip, and he's just explaining about the Ferrari in your brain, and that's the ADHD. He's like, it just wants to go, it just wants to go, it just wants to go, and yeah, I think it's a fantastic metaphor.
It's brilliant. And Ned Hallowell wrote Driven to Distraction, which is
Hmm.
just a phenomenal book. If you live with ADHD, or you know someone that does, or you've got children or whatever, it's a book that, I can't tell you how many adults have said, it's like reading my autobiography. I mean, all of these different things. And it's a very elegant, I think, respectful way of inviting people to think about who they are in the world with ADHD a little bit different.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find it on my phone. Here it is. There's another amazing one of the best books that I've heard that's super helpful for people with ADHD is Faster Than Normal
Yes,
by Peter Shankman as well. That's another book that I really, really
dynamite.
thought was useful for anybody that's listening to this.
Yes, that's absolutely perfect. They're two great books.
Amazing. So, Patrick, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't that we can maybe address for people listening?
Okay, that you should have, I don't know. Um, However, what comes to my brain is this notion that regardless of how we grow up, is it possible to achieve this notion of social and emotional balance? And I mean, everybody listening has come from a lot of different places here. And is it possible? I'm going to give a resounding yes. It is. The I remember the day when I realized that I was no longer 10 or 9. I was actually a young adult, and I had the power to make decisions about who I was in the world that I couldn't make at 9 or 10. And that moment for me stands out. I literally remember where I was when I had that realization. And we have the power. Look at you. We have the resources around us to feed us toward becoming the best version of who we can be. And there's whether we're angry as hell or we're drunk as hell or we're shy as hell or whatever it might be, that if that's not exactly what we wanted, we would like something different, we can do it, because I think the level of support is there.
Amazing. So if people have thought, "Do you know what, this is so interesting. I'd love to learn more about EQI 2.0 or connect with you." Where can people connect with you? Where can people find out more?
If you want the book, you can go to Amazon or wherever it would be. It's just look up Patrick Kilcarr or emotional intelligence, and it'll pop up. The eilife.com is my website, and or just Kilcarr, KILCARRP at georgetown.edu. If you have a thought or an idea, send it to me. I'll get back to you.
Amazing. Well, for everybody that's been listening to this, I hope it started to expand your awareness around emotional intelligence, create some insights and some intrigue to start exploring. And yeah, definitely something to consider. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been great having you.
Well, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And everybody that's been listening, until next time, make it happen. Thank you for listening to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with anybody that you think could benefit from it. And also make sure that you hit subscribe so that you get to get the new episodes as soon as they're released.